All right, in this video, we're going to investigate a little bit more the slope of the PPF and the opportunity cost that's related to it. So right here in our PPF that we drew before, we have a straight line and we have the slope of this line. So of course it's straight, so it's going to be a constant slope. The slope's going to be the same. So what we mean by that is our trade-off, if we remember, it's 5 to 1. So if we go down 5, if we want to get one more clothing, we're going to have to give up 5 food to get 1 clothing, and 5 food to get 1 clothing, and 5 food to get 1 clothing, like that. If we're going the other way, then we want to get 1 food, we only have to give up 1/5 of clothing. Okay, so the slope tells us if our slope is steeper, then it tells us that the item in the x-axis, in this case clothing, is a bigger opportunity cost. Okay, so that tells us that the x-axis has a greater, well, is more opportunity cost. It doesn't mean it's more than the other one, but more, the steeper it is, the more the opportunity cost is. Okay, so in this case, we're talking x-axis, so we're talking the clothing. Okay, so the slope, we can just visually see it. When you see a really steep line, then you know that compared to a flatter line, then you know the steep line is more opportunity cost for the thing that's on the x-axis. Now, there's something not very realistic about what we've done. That when we have a straight line, then we're making an assumption, and that assumption doesn't really make sense. So we're assuming that this assumes that trade-off is constant. So remember, the opportunity cost is given to us by the slope here, and we said, well, it's constant here. If it's a straight line, that means the trade-off is constant, and that's not very realistic. So let's talk about, this video we're going to talk about why that's not very realistic and what would be a better option. So the main reason it's not very realistic is that assumes all. Remember, it's the limitation of this PPF is our technology and our resources. And so this sort of assumes, well, our resources are sort of exchangeable between these two things. And so basically our resources are pretty much all the same. And then we can just exchange them between these two things. So if we want to get a little bit more clothing, then we just shift some people from making food to making clothing, and shift some other resources from making food to making clothing. And even if we start from all food or somewhere in the middle, it doesn't make a difference where we start from. This rate of exchange is sort of constant. So I'm going to try to convince you now that what I'm going to draw right now, a curve, is more realistic. Okay, so I'm going to try to convince you. So this is our clothing still. Oops. Clothing and our food. So same goods. But I'm going to try to convince you that something that looks maybe like this is a more realistic. Okay, so we're going to say, well, this is more realistic. And so, well, why? What is that? What are we talking about? So let's go ahead and try to convince you about that. Okay, so remember here, point A, we got only food. So let's start from here, and we start to move. We start to go the other way. So the curve still means the same thing. Along the curve is productive efficiency, that we're doing as best we can with the resources. The only thing that the curve means is that our trade-off is not constant, opportunity cost is not constant. Okay, so this means the curve, we get this trade-off not constant. So at first, in this case, the trade-off is going to be really little. So suppose you want to get you're all making only food, you want to get a little bit more clothing. Well, then we want a little bit more clothing, so we give up a little bit of food, and we get a lot of clothing. So this is what we get, right? So we give up a little bit of food. That's here. This is the give up. I'm not going to label it because it's a little too close to the edge. And then we get this bottom part. So we give up a little, we get a lot. So that's low opportunity cost, right? So let's say we're going from, let's call this from A to B, right? So A to B, we got a low opportunity cost. We got low opportunity cost. And so on our graph, that's going to be shown by flat slope, okay? But why would this be low? Well, remember when we're doing only food, we're putting all our resources in food, and we're kind of assuming here that we have different kinds of resources. So just to keep with this simple example, we're shifting resources from food that might not be very good at food. So for example, let's suppose we have two kind of workers. We have workers who are sort of trained and suited towards farming, and we have workers that are trained and suited towards making clothing. So fashion designers or garment workers versus farmers and agricultural scientists. Okay, so when we move from all food, who are you gonna shift first? Well, you're going to shift those kind of specialized resources. So we're going to shift like garment workers, and so we're going to shift garment workers and fashion designers, for example, to well, let me say from food to clothing. Okay, and these people probably weren't very good at growing food, and they're probably pretty good at clothing. So that's sort of the logic there. You got some specialized workers, some specialized resources. They don't have to be workers. And so when you move them away from the thing they're not very good at towards the thing that they are good at, they give up very little, and you end up gaining a lot. Okay, but you see this slope is getting steeper and steeper as we move down the line. So right here it's pretty shallow. As we get down here to the other end, let's make a point here like C. When we start getting closer to the clothing side, the slope gets a whole lot steeper. So let's suppose you're at C and you said, we got a lot of food here, right? We can kind of remind ourselves. We got some food and we got quite a bit of clothing here, right? Mostly clothing. And you say, well, I'm still not happy. I want more clothing. And so you want to go from C to D. So we go from C to D, right? And well, how are we going to get from C to D? So we go from C to D. Now we got the opposite situation going on. We are now our give up. This is give up. We give up a lot, and what we get is very little. Okay, so as you can imagine, that's going to be a high opportunity cost, right? So now we are shifting workers and resources from something they're good at. They're good at making food. They're good at farming. To something they're not very good at, which is clothing, right? So we're shifting farmers and maybe land for farming to making clothing. So of course they're really good at one side, and they're going to give up a lot, and they're not really good at the other side because it's not their specialty. So we're going to not make very much on the other side, not make very much profit. So this is sort of the idea for why the curve is more realistic, because in any economy you're going to have different kinds of resources, and so if you give them up in this way, if you try to shift from one thing to the other, you would find that the trade-off will not be constant, right? There's going to be a part where it's easy to get more of the thing, and then when you get to the end and try to get all of it, then it's going to get really hard to get more of it. So as we went from A to B, it was easy to get more clothing, but trying to get all clothing is very difficult. And so we can kind of summarize this with one. Okay, so we can summarize this final idea. So this gives us the idea that we get increasing marginal opportunity cost. So that means if we move from the top, as we did with all food or all whatever's on the y-axis, and we go towards the bottom, well, the opportunity gets higher and higher. And it's sort of this idea, well, you do the easy part first because you're putting the resources that are really good at that thing, switching them first, and by the end you're doing the hard part. And the hard part is trying to get that last little bit is always the hard part, because you're putting resources there that really aren't very good at that thing. And so this kind of illustrates a more general economic concept, and this is a concept often known as the law of diminishing returns. Okay, and so this is related, closely related, although the law of diminishing returns is a little wider than what we're talking about. And it's basically tells us the more resources you already devoted to an activity, usually the smaller the payoff is going to be for devoting additional resources to that. Okay, so the more resources already devoted to an activity, the smaller the payoff for devoting additional resources to it. And that sort of is kind of intuitive. We can think of maybe an example in our own life. So for example, studying. Okay, so let's take the example real quick of studying for your classes. So let's suppose you aim for getting a 2.0. Well, if you aim for getting a 2.0, you could probably do that by turning in all your assignments, showing up to class, and taking all your tests on time, and studying and opening the book once in a while. And 3.0 will be a little harder, but it still might be a reasonable amount of work. And then as you set your highs higher and higher, you're trying to get more and more of that activity. As you get closer and closer to 4.0, the amount of work will be getting much more. In fact, say going from an A minus in class to an A, and then if you go to even higher, it might even be impossible, but it might be possible. But you'll be devoting a tremendous number of hours to the activity. And let's suppose you go to the total extreme. We say, well, in every class I want to be the top grade. Then you might have to study around the clock, and it still might not even work, right? So this gives us a sort of idea. At first, when we're devoting nothing, we're spending 0 time studying. If we study a few hours, it'll make a big difference. And if we're already studying a lot, then studying a little bit more is not going to make much difference at all. One last thing,